Let me ask you something you've probably never been asked directly. What if everything you were taught about women was wrong? Not slightly off, not a little outdated, completely, fundamentally, dangerously wrong. And what if that wrong belief has been quietly destroying every relationship you've ever had, every moment of connection you thought was real, every time you handed your heart to someone who was never actually holding it? You were raised on a story. We all were. From the first movie you watched as a kid, from the first time you heard your father talk about your mother, from every song on the radio and every novel assigned in school, the message was the same. Women are the emotional center of the universe. They love deeper. They feel more. They are the warmth in the cold, the healing in the wound, the answer to the chaos rattling around inside every man. She was the prize. She was the destination. And you were the one who was supposed to earn her. So, you did what you were told. You chased. You proved yourself. You worked to be worthy. You softened your edges when she seemed uncomfortable. You swallowed your opinions when they threatened the peace. You showed up again and again, offering the best version of yourself on a silver platter, hoping that one day she would look at you and finally say, without hesitation, "You are enough." And here's the thing. Sometimes she did say it, and it felt like oxygen, like the whole world made sense for a moment. But that moment never lasted, did it? And you could never quite figure out why. So you tried harder, you gave more, you bent further, and still, something was always slightly out of reach. That feeling, that perpetual gap between how much you gave and how seen you actually felt, that's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's the direct result of a myth you swallowed whole before you were old enough to question it. Aristotle didn't sugarcoat this. He was one of the greatest minds in human history, a man who dedicated his life to understanding nature as it actually is, not as we wish it to be. He looked at human biology, at behavior, at the structure of relationships between men and women, and he didn't dress what he found in poetry or sentiment. He said it plainly, as a cold observation rooted in the logic of nature itself. And what he observed wasn't about hatred. It wasn't about superiority. It was about function, about design, about the hard truth that nature doesn't build things based on what makes us feel good. Nature builds things based on what works. And what works, Aristotle argued, is hierarchy, structure, polarity. Not cruelty, not domination, but a natural order that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And the moment you pretend that order doesn't exist, the moment you try to operate outside of it in the name of fairness or romance or modern sensitivity, things stop working. Not because you're a bad person, because you're fighting biology with ideology. Now, I know what some of you are already thinking. This sounds like an excuse to dismiss women. It's not. Stay with me. Because what Aristotle was pointing at isn't a reason to look down on women. It's a reason to stop looking up to them as something they were never meant to be. There's a massive difference between those two things. The myth that ruined you isn't that women are valuable. They are. The myth is that women are your salvation, that the right woman will fix the emptiness, that love, if you can just find enough of it, will make you whole. That belief, gentle, romantic, completely sincere, is the most dangerous idea most men carry, because it turns a relationship into a transaction where you're always paying and never quite getting what you came for. Aristotle saw this clearly. He understood that when you place a woman in the position of your emotional anchor, your source of meaning, your reason to wake up in the morning, you don't elevate her, you burden her, and you don't love her. You need her. And need dressed up as love still smells like desperation when she gets close enough. This video exists because that myth is still running most men's lives. The men who can't understand why she left when he gave her everything. The men who shrink themselves to keep the relationship alive and then wonder why the attraction died. The men who perform kindness like a strategy and call it love. The men who have never been told that the problem isn't how much they gave, but what they gave it up for. Aristotle gave us a framework long before any of this had a name. He looked at nature, looked at men and women, looked at the art, and he told us the truth. Not the truth that feels good, the truth that actually sets you free. And that truth starts here, with the myth, with the story you were handed as a boy and never thought to question as a man. Because until you see the story for what it is, you'll keep living inside it. And she'll keep letting you. Not because she's cruel, because that's how the story goes. Here's something nobody ever put in the history books, at least not in a way they wanted you to notice. For thousands of years, women had no armies, no legal systems built in their favor, no institutional power, no corporate ladders, no political offices with their names on the door. They were excluded from almost every structure that men built to organize the world. And yet, somehow, they have always been at the center of it. Not above it, not below it, at the center of it. Quietly, consistently, undeniably. Ask yourself how that's possible. Ask yourself how a group with no structural power managed to shape the behavior of the group that had all of it. Ask yourself why emperors consulted women in private that they dismissed in public. Why kings who commanded armies still went home and changed their decisions based on a single conversation behind closed doors. Why the most powerful men in history, men who conquered nations and rewrote borders, were frequently undone not on the battlefield, but in their bedrooms. The answer isn't magic. It isn't divine feminine energy. It's something far more interesting and far more practical. It's strategy. It's adaptation. It's the kind of intelligence that develops not in boardrooms, but in survival. Aristotle understood this better than almost anyone who came after him. He observed that nature doesn't give every organism the same tools. It gives each organism the tools it needs to survive in its specific environment. A wolf doesn't need camouflage. A chameleon doesn't need teeth. And a woman operating in a world built and controlled by men didn't need brute force. She needed something more precise. Something that worked from the inside rather than the outside. Something that didn't look like power at all, which is exactly what made it so effective. What she developed over centuries, what was passed down not in books, but in behavior, in observation, in the quiet education of daughters watching mothers, was emotional fluency, the ability to read a room before she walked through it, the ability to sense what a man needed to hear in order to move in the direction she required, the ability to make herself indispensable not through dominance but through presence, through becoming, over time, the thing that the man with all the power couldn't function without. This is not evil. Let's be completely clear about that. This is not a conspiracy. Women did not gather in secret and design a plan to undermine men. What happened is far more natural and far more inevitable than that. When you remove structural power from any group, that group finds other paths. When you close the front door, people find the window. Human beings are adaptive by nature, and women, forced to operate without the tools men had access to, became extraordinarily skilled at using the tools they did have: emotional intelligence, observation, subtlety, patience, the ability to influence without appearing to influence at all. And here is where it gets uncomfortable for most men, because those tools, the ones that were born out of necessity, out of exclusion, out of centuries of having to work indirectly to get anything done, those tools are still being used today. Not because the world hasn't changed. It has. But because the wiring doesn't change as fast as the laws do. The instincts that helped women survive and navigate for generations don't simply disappear because a new century arrived. So when you sit across from a woman you're interested in and you feel like she already knows more about the conversation than you do, you're not imagining it. When you feel like she arrived prepared and you showed up open, you're not being paranoid. When you sense that she's reading something in you that you haven't said out loud, you're right. She is. Not because she's malicious, because she was built for exactly that. Because generations of necessity created a kind of perception in women that most men were never required to develop. You were built to read the environment, to assess physical threat, to compete directly and openly with other men where the rules were visible and the outcome was clear. She was built to read people, to assess emotional terrain, to influence indirectly in spaces where direct competition was never an option. Those are not the same skill sets. And walking into a relationship without understanding that difference is like showing up to a chess match thinking you're playing checkers. The board looks similar enough. The pieces are familiar, but the rules are completely different, and she already knows all of them. Now here's the part that most men get completely backwards. Understanding this is not a reason to resent women. It's not a reason to pull back, build walls, or decide that all women are manipulative and the whole thing is a trap. That reaction is the reaction of a man who just lost a game he didn't know he was playing. And instead of learning the game, he flips the table. The actual response, the one that changes everything, is to recognize the architecture, to see it clearly, without anger, without bitterness, without the need to assign blame. Because once you see it, once you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of every interaction, you stop being a passive participant in someone else's strategy and start becoming a man with a strategy of his own. That's not dominance. That's not manipulation in reverse. That's simply waking up. That's finally understanding what Aristotle pointed at all those centuries ago, that nature is not sentimental. Nature is structured, and the man who understands the structure is no longer at its mercy. He's working with it. Close your eyes for a second and think about the last time a woman looked at you like you were everything. That feeling, that specific, intoxicating, almost unbearable feeling of being seen completely by someone you wanted deeply. Remember how it felt to be on the receiving end of that gaze, like the world narrowed down to just the two of you, like you finally made sense to someone else, like all the work, all the waiting, all the longing had been worth it because she saw you. Now I'm going to tell you something that's going to be hard to hear. She wasn't seeing you, not you. Not the actual man standing in front of her with his history and his fears and his specific way of laughing too loud at his own jokes. She was seeing something she built, a projection, a version of you assembled from her own needs, her own history, her own internal image of what a man should be. You were the canvas. She brought the paint, and what she fell in love with, what made her eyes light up and her voice soften and her walls come down, was her own creation wearing your face. Aristotle wrote about this long before modern psychology had language for it. He observed that perception is never neutral, that what we see is always filtered through what we need, what we fear, what we desire. We don't experience reality directly. We experience our interpretation of it. And in the context of attraction, in the raw and vulnerable territory of wanting another person, that interpretation becomes almost entirely self-referential. She doesn't see you. She sees what you represent to the unfinished parts of her. And here's where it gets specific. Because this isn't abstract philosophy. This is something you can trace in your own experience if you're honest enough to look. Think about the early days, the way she talked about you to her friends, qualities she listed: confident, strong, mysterious, driven. Did those words actually match who you were, or did they match who she needed you to be? Think about the moment things started to shift. Was it when you changed, or was it when you stopped fitting the image she had constructed? Was it when you failed her, or was it when you showed her something real about yourself that didn't match the projection? Most men experience that shift as rejection, as a verdict on their worth. They internalize it. They carry it forward. They start adjusting their behavior in the next relationship to avoid triggering that same disapproval. But what they're actually experiencing is something completely different. They're experiencing the moment the projection cracked, the moment reality showed through. And the response they got wasn't a judgment on who they are. It was a woman grieving the loss of who she imagined them to be. That's not love. What was lost wasn't love. What was lost was a fantasy. And the tragedy is that most men spend their entire lives trying to resurrect a fantasy that was never about them in the first place. Now layer on top of this what Aristotle identified about the nature of female observation. She is watching you constantly, not the way you watch a game, passively waiting for something to happen. She is actively cataloging every hesitation in your voice, every moment you look away when you should hold eye contact, every time you change your answer based on her reaction rather than your actual belief, every crack in the confidence, every flash of need. She's not doing this to hurt you. She's doing this because she's trying to answer a question she may not even be consciously aware she's asking. Is this man real? Is there something solid here? Or is this another performance I'm going to have to see through eventually? And when she finds the answer, when she locates the place where your self-image ends and the performance begins, something shifts in how she relates to you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but internally, in the part of her that was making a long-term assessment, something closes. A door you probably didn't even know was open quietly shuts. What she was looking for was not perfection. That's the misunderstanding most men operate under. They think the goal is to be impressive enough, polished enough, accomplished enough that she never finds anything lacking. But that's not what she's scanning for. She's scanning for authenticity, for a man who is the same person whether she's watching or not, for someone whose center doesn't move based on her mood, because a man whose center moves based on her mood becomes, over time, her emotional dependent. And emotional dependents don't get desired, they get managed. This is what Aristotle understood about human nature at its core. We don't value what accommodates us. We value what has integrity, what holds its shape under pressure, what remains identifiably itself, regardless of the environment around it. Gold is valuable not because it's agreeable. It's valuable because it doesn't corrode. It stays gold no matter what you put it in contact with. The man she actually wants, the man who lives somewhere in her instincts beneath all the noise of what she says she wants, is a man who looks back at her with the same clear eyes she's using on him. A man who isn't performing. A man who isn't auditioning. A man who isn't waiting breathlessly for her assessment. A man who already knows what he is. And until you become that man, what she sees when she looks at you will never be you. It will be a mirror of her own longing, useful for a while, replaceable the moment something shinier walks through the door, not because you weren't enough, because you never showed her what enough actually looked like on you. That's the work, and it starts not with her. It starts with the moment you stop needing her to tell you who you are. There is a version of you that she will never be attracted to, not because he's ugly, not because he's unsuccessful, not because he lacks intelligence or humor or the ability to hold a conversation. This version of you can have all of those things and still generate nothing in her. No heat, no tension, no desire. He can show up every day, consistent and devoted and generous, and she will appreciate him the way you appreciate a reliable car. Grateful it starts every morning, not particularly moved by it. You probably know this man. You might be him. He's the one who texts back immediately, every time, who rearranges his schedule without being asked, who swallows his opinion the moment he senses it might create friction, who reads her mood the second he walks in the room and recalibrates everything about himself to match it, who says yes when he means no, who smiles when he's frustrated, who apologizes reflexively even when he has no idea what he did wrong. He calls it being supportive. He calls it being emotionally available. He calls it love. She calls it something else. She doesn't say it out loud. She might not even have a clean word for it. But she feels it in her body before her mind can name it. She feels the absence of something she needs, something that used to be there and slowly, gradually, so politely, disappeared. Aristotle identified the foundation of this problem 2,500 years ago, and he did it without the benefit of modern psychology or relationship theory or any of the vocabulary we now use to dress this up. He went straight to nature. He looked at how things actually function when you strip away the sentiment and the stories we tell ourselves. And what he found was this. Nature is built on polarity, on the tension between opposites, on the dynamic charge that exists between things that are genuinely different from each other. Remove that polarity, flatten that difference, and you don't get harmony. You get stagnation. You get a system with no current running through it. Attraction is electrical. It requires poles, a positive and a negative. The moment both poles become the same charge, the current stops. Not because either one is broken, because the conditions for electricity no longer exist. This is what happens when a man becomes a nice guy in the way that kills desire. He doesn't lose his looks. He doesn't lose his income or his humor or his ability to be kind. He loses his charge. He becomes so agreeable, so accommodating, so endlessly available that there is nothing left for her to pull against. And without something to pull against, there is nothing to feel, just warmth. Flat, directionless, unchallenging warmth, the relationship equivalent of a room with no windows and no weather. And here's the part that makes this so brutal for men who genuinely care. The nice guy isn't performing. That's what makes the trap so complete. He actually means it. He actually believes that being this way is the path to love. He was told explicitly or implicitly by culture, by women in his life, by the general narrative he absorbed growing up, that what women want is a man who listens, who adjusts, who puts her first, who never makes her uncomfortable, who is always there. So he became that man. He did the work. He showed up exactly as instructed, and she left anyway, or stayed, but slowly went cold, or stayed warm, but stopped looking at him the way she used to, and he has no idea why, because he followed every rule he was given. What he wasn't told, what nobody bothered to mention, is that the rules he was given were not written by desire. They were written by comfort, and comfort and desire are not the same thing. They are not even neighbors. They live in completely different parts of the human nervous system, and they respond to completely different stimuli. Comfort wants predictability. Desire wants tension. Comfort wants softness. Desire wants edges. Comfort wants a man who accommodates. Desire wants a man who holds his ground. You can be the most comfortable man she has ever been around and generate zero desire in her. And that combination, comfort without desire, is where relationships go to die, slowly, in perfectly clean, conflict-free silence. Aristotle was precise about what differentiates things that have genuine value from things that are merely useful. Value, he argued, comes from form, from a thing being distinctly and completely itself. A blade that bends to avoid cutting is no longer a blade. It's just metal. It has lost the quality that made it what it was. A man who bends himself around a woman's every mood and preference to avoid friction has done the same thing. He has traded his form for her comfort, and in doing so, he has made himself into something that functions but doesn't fascinate, something present but not felt. She doesn't want a man who bends. She wants a man who holds shape, not rigidly, not coldly, not without empathy or care or the ability to adapt, but a man who, at his center, does not move based on her emotional weather, a man who can hear her frustration without dissolving into apology, who can disagree without panic, who can walk out of the room when he needs to and come back when he's ready without either moment being a crisis. That man is not cruel. He is not withholding. He is not playing games. He is simply anchored, and an anchored man, a man with a genuine center that doesn't shift based on external pressure, creates the one condition that makes desire possible. He creates polarity, and polarity is not something you can fake. It is not a technique or a tactic or a script you run to create attraction. It is the natural result of a man who knows who he is and refuses to trade that knowledge for approval, even hers, especially hers. The nice guy thinks love is earned through service, through consistency, through making himself as easy as possible to be around. But what he's actually doing is erasing himself one accommodation at a time, and you cannot love what you cannot see. You cannot desire what has no edges. You cannot be drawn to a man who has made himself into a reflection of what you want, because all you ever end up seeing is yourself. She doesn't want a mirror, she wants a man. She is testing you right now, not in a boardroom, not with a written exam, not with anything she will ever admit to or even fully recognize in herself. But the test is happening. It has been happening since the first conversation. It happens in the silences she creates when she pulls back without explanation. It happens in the disagreement she starts over something that doesn't actually matter. It happens in the moment she challenges a decision you made, not because the decision was wrong, but because she needs to see what you do when you're pushed. Whether you hold, whether you fold, whether you apologize before you've even assessed whether you were wrong. And here is what no one ever tells you about these tests. She doesn't want to fail you. She is not running this process out of cruelty or calculation or some conscious desire to watch you stumble. She is doing it because something deep and pre-rational inside her is asking a question that her conscious mind cannot ask directly. Is there actually a man in here? Not a performance of a man, not a man-shaped collection of accommodations and people-pleasing reflexes. An actual man with an actual spine, with an actual center that exists independently of her approval. Because here is what she knows, on a level below language, below strategy, below anything she could articulate at dinner. If you collapse under her pressure, you will collapse under everything else too. If you abandon your position the moment she expresses displeasure, you will abandon it under real stress, under financial pressure, under the weight of actual crisis. If you cannot hold your ground with her, you cannot hold anything. And she needs to know, before she goes any further, whether you can hold. Aristotle wrote about the nature of character as something revealed not in comfort, but in resistance. He argued that virtue, genuine virtue, is not what a man says about himself, or even what he does when conditions are easy. It is what remains of him when conditions are hard, when the pressure is real, when holding his position costs him something. That is the moment character either exists or it doesn't, and there is no faking it. Not at that moment, not under that kind of pressure. The real man and the performance of a man look identical right up until the test arrives. And then they look nothing alike. She knows this intuitively. She may not have read Aristotle. She may not have the language for what she's doing. But her instincts have been calibrated by something far older than philosophy. They've been calibrated by thousands of years of needing to accurately assess whether the man in front of her is actually what he appears to be, because the cost of getting that assessment wrong, historically, was catastrophic. So she developed an instrument for measuring it, and that instrument is the test. Now let's talk about what failing the test actually looks like, because most men fail it in exactly the same way and never understand what happened. She says something that challenges you. Maybe she questions a decision you made with complete confidence. Maybe she withdraws affection without explanation and waits to see what you do with the silence. Maybe she picks a fight over something small. And you, because you care about her, because you want the tension to resolve, because you have been taught that a good man smooths things over, you move, you soften, you explain yourself more than the situation requires. You apologize not because you believe you were wrong, but because the discomfort of her displeasure feels unbearable. You rearrange your position to match hers because matching hers feels like connection. It is not connection, it is dissolution. And she feels the difference immediately, not consciously, not as a thought she can report back to you, but somewhere in the part of her that was running the assessment, a result registers. And the result is not good, because what you just demonstrated is not love. What you demonstrated is that your sense of self is contingent on her approval, that her emotional state has more authority over your behavior than your own judgment does. That you can be moved not by logic, not by new information, not by a genuinely compelling argument, but simply by the presence of her discomfort. And a man who can be moved that easily is not a man she can trust with the weight of her own vulnerability. Here is the paradox that most men never see. The moment you hold your ground calmly, the moment you hear her challenge and respond from your actual position rather than from your fear of her reaction, the tension doesn't escalate the way you expect it to. It transforms. What was friction becomes something else, something that feels to her nervous system like safety. Not the safety of a man who agrees with everything, the safety of a man who is actually there, solid, present, real. A man whose presence doesn't reshape itself around her mood like water taking the shape of whatever container holds it. That solidity is what she was looking for the whole time. That is what the test was designed to find, not dominance. Not arrogance, not the performance of a man who refuses to listen or dismisses her feelings or turns every disagreement into a power struggle. That's not holding your ground. That's just a different kind of performance. What she's looking for is something far more subtle and far more rare. A man who can be fully present with her reality without being consumed by it, who can hear her anger without becoming afraid of it, who can sit inside the tension of a difficult moment without needing to make it disappear immediately at the cost of his own integrity. Aristotle called this equanimity, the capacity to remain centered in the face of pressure, not detached, not cold, not unreachable, but grounded, like a tree that moves in the wind because it is alive and responsive, but does not uproot because its roots go deep enough that the storm cannot reach them. That is what she is testing for. Every time, without exception, in every relationship, with every man. The question is never whether the test is coming. The question is whether you'll be ready when it does. There is a moment that happens in certain relationships, rare enough that most men never experience it, but unmistakable when it arrives. It is the moment she stops testing, not because she gave up, not because she settled, but because she found what she was looking for. Because somewhere in the course of knowing you, you showed her something that made the searching stop. Not a performance, not a grand gesture, not the right words delivered at the right moment. Something quieter than that. Something she felt before she understood it. The sense that you were already whole before she arrived. That your life had weight and direction and meaning that existed independently of her presence in it. That you were, in the most complete sense of the phrase, already home inside yourself. That man, the one who produces that feeling in her, is not a mystery. He is not some rare genetic anomaly or the product of circumstances most men will never have access to. He is simply a man who made a choice A specific, difficult, ongoing choice that most men are never willing to make because it requires giving up the one thing they have been conditioned since boyhood to chase above everything else: her approval. Aristotle spent his life studying what made things excellent, not adequate, not functional, not good enough, excellent. And what he found across every domain he examined, from ethics to politics to the natural world, was that excellence always requires the same foundational element. A thing must be fully and completely itself. It must express its own nature without compromise, without apology, without bending toward what is easier or more comfortable or more immediately rewarded. A blade that is excellent because it cuts with complete commitment to what a blade is supposed to do. A man who is excellent for exactly the same reason. He is completely and uncompromisingly what a man is supposed to be, not what she wants him to be, not what culture tells him to perform, what he actually is, at the deepest level of his own nature. And here is what that looks like in practice, not in theory, not in philosophy, in the actual texture of daily life with a woman who matters to you. It looks like disagreeing with her calmly when you disagree, without anger, without cruelty, but without retreating either. Holding your position not because you need to win, but because your position is actually yours, and you respect it enough not to abandon it for the sake of temporary peace. It looks like having a direction for your life that doesn't require her permission to pursue, work you care about, standards you hold, a vision that existed before she walked in and will continue whether or not she stays. It looks like being able to sit with her distress without absorbing it as your own emergency, holding space for her emotion while remaining identifiably yourself inside it, not solving it, not dismissing it, just being present with it from a place that doesn't shake. It looks like wanting her without needing her. That distinction is everything. Wanting her means she enhances a life that is already full. Needing her means she is the structural support for a life that would collapse in her absence. She can feel that difference in the way you look at her, in the quality of your attention, in whether your presence feels like a gift or a demand. A man who wants her brings something to the relationship. A man who needs her takes something from it, every day, quietly, in ways neither of them can fully name, until the exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. This is what Aristotle pointed at when he spoke about the highest form of human love. Not the love that consumes, not the love that possesses or depends or diminishes the other person through the sheer weight of its need, but the love that is generated from fullness, from a man who has done enough internal work that he can offer himself without strings attached, without the invisible invoice that most men hand to the women they love without realizing they're doing it. The invoice that reads, "I have given you everything. Now you owe me your validation, your certainty, your permanent presence, your reassurance that I am enough." A woman cannot pay that invoice, not because she doesn't want to, because no human being can be the source of another human being's completeness. It is too much weight. It breaks the thing it's placed on every time. And the man who understands this truly understands it not as an idea, but as a lived reality, stops handing it out. He takes back the invoice. He becomes responsible for his own sense of worth in a way that costs him his last comfortable excuse. He can no longer blame her for the emptiness he feels. He can no longer interpret her distance as a verdict on his value. He can no longer use the relationship as a mirror he holds up to confirm that he exists and matters. He has to find that confirmation inside himself, and that is the loneliest, hardest, most important work a man can do. But here is what happens on the other side of that work, on the other side of that particular loneliness. She exhales. That is the only word for it. Something in her that was braced, that was waiting, that was holding itself at a careful distance because it couldn't yet trust the solidity of what it was being asked to lean on. That thing finally relaxes. Not because you became perfect, not because you stopped making mistakes or having bad days or struggling with the things you struggle with, but because she can feel that your foundation doesn't depend on her to hold it up, that she can bring her full weight to you without the fear that you will crumble under it. That is what she was hoping for from the beginning, through every test, through every moment of distance and challenge and carefully placed friction. She was not trying to break you. She was trying to find out if you could be broken. And when she finds out you can't, not because you're rigid, but because you're rooted, everything changes. You become the rarest thing she has ever encountered, a man she can actually rest with, not because you gave her everything she asked for, but because you showed her something she didn't know she needed until she felt it. The presence of a man who chose himself completely, honestly, without apology, and from that wholeness chose her too. Not from emptiness, not from fear, not from the desperate arithmetic of a man who has decided that her love is the only math that makes his life add up. From freedom. Aristotle called it the highest expression of human nature. The moment a person becomes so fully themselves that their presence becomes a gift rather than a demand. When you reach that point, and you can reach it, the relationship stops being a negotiation and becomes something neither of you have to manage anymore. It just breathes. And that right there, that quiet, unforced, genuinely mutual breath, is what love actually looks like when it's built on something real.